Well, greetings, everyone. My name is Kate Rademacher, and I'm here with Writing for Your Life with author Lori Ann Wood. I'm delighted to be with Lori Ann. We're going to be hearing about her book today, Divine Detour. And just briefly, I'm going to give a mini introduction and then let Lori Ann tell us more about herself and her story and her book, which is coming out on February 21st. Lori Ann lives in Arkansas, and she discovered a serious heart condition almost too late. And she writes to encourage others to embrace difficult faith questions along the detours of life. She has an award-winning style of her writing of journal entries, relatable stories, and honest spiritual struggles. Lori Ann is a regular contributor and blog team member for Heart, Health, and Faith website. So we're delighted to have you here, Lori Ann. And the title of your book is Divine Detour. The path you'd never choose can lead to the faith you've always wanted. I love that. So maybe we can just start. You could perhaps just tell us a little bit about your story and the book and how this kind of came to be.
Yes. Well, it started out kind of on an ordinary day. It was about 7 years ago, and I just felt kind of sluggish. I felt fatigued, thought maybe I had the flu, maybe it was pneumonia, and was still doing all the things that I do, getting ready for company, still had kids at home, and I wasn't getting any better after a few days. I had been to convenient care a couple times and just wasn't getting any better. And I went to my primary care doctor, and he immediately took an x-ray of my chest and found that my heart was very enlarged, and I was direct admitted into cardiac ICU. And I spent 14 days there with my heart functioning at just 6%. And it was very much out of the blue for me. If I had listed all the worries and health fears that I had at that point in my life, anything related to heart would have been at the very bottom. I even got a medical evaluation 3 weeks before this discovery of my heart failure. And it told me that I had less than 3% chance of ever developing heart disease in my lifetime because I had low cholesterol, low blood pressure, no family history, no risk factors. And yet there I was 3 weeks after that in end-stage heart failure. And they don't really know the cause at this point. It could have been some genetic marker that they haven't discovered yet. It could have been a virus. But regardless, I was put on some very high-powered medication, which I still take, a lot of medication. And eventually I was flown to Cleveland Clinic and became my doctor's most critical patient for 1.5 years. And during that time, I wore a life vest, which is an external defibrillator that you wear, and it's able to shock your body like you see in movies or on TV, only it's something that you wear that will shock you. And I just wasn't getting any better for that 1.5 years. I was holding on, which was a miracle in itself, but I wasn't getting any better. And then it was actually 16 months from the time I was diagnosed, my heart function was tested because I came down with appendicitis and they needed to take my appendix out. And they discovered that my heart function was actually normal, which no one expected. And at that point, I had not started writing, but I thought, okay, this is my tip. This is my story. It's a story of divine healing and provision and answered prayer and all of these things. And I was ready to tell that story. And then 3 years ago, my heart function dropped and I was in active heart failure again. So I've been on this sort of up and down journey with my health. And I found that it sort of mirrors the up and down journey with my faith as well. But heart failure is it's a chronic progressive disease. And for most people, medical science can help manage the symptoms. For some people, they can slow the progression, but ultimately it only goes in one direction. And right now I'm holding steady at a lower plateau than normal, but I'm actually a really high functioning heart failure patient. And so I'm really grateful for that. But I'm even more grateful because that time where I had to really step back from what I had ordinarily been doing. I don't think I would have done this in a safer, healthier life, but I took time to write, and I found that I didn't have energy for a lot of things, but I could sit down in front of my computer and I could write. And that was something that had sort of been in the back of my mind. I think a lot of people have that feeling that they have a book inside of them, and we just are never pushed to that point of urgency to get it done. And so that was one of the blessings. And so this book that I wrote, Divine Detour, it was born sort of my diagnosis and my illness, but it's not primarily about my medical events. There's tidbits of it in there, but it's really a guide for people who feel like they've been detoured in life unexpectedly. And it's the 3 questions that I found. All the writing that I was doing following that diagnosis and all the struggles I was feeling, my writing was going into 3 buckets. And I realized that those are 3 questions, and my readers started to tell me those are the same 3 questions I have. And so I was starting to put those into 3 categories and realize that they're the 3 questions that we all answer in our life one way or another. And so that's how the book took shape. And it became it's a book of essays that really examines those 3 questions and gives voice to the 3 questions, and hopefully helps other people find the 3 questions in their own story.
Yeah, well, I'm so sorry for, first of all, for all you've been through, and glad so glad and grateful you're with us, and glad you've been able to write and share your story, and really excited about the launch. And so you mentioned the 3 questions. So I'm wondering if you could, first of all, tell us the 3 questions. And then secondly,
Yeah.
regarding that, in the materials you sent me, ahead of time, you said you wrote something that I thought was really compelling, which is you were wanting answers through this whole journey, but more than anything, you needed and wanted permission to ask the questions. And so perhaps you could, again, tell us the 3 questions that you sort of organize your book around, and sort of say more about what do you mean by needing permission to ask the questions?
Yes. So the 3 questions that I found that sort of fell out of what I was writing, and it kind of started because my friend dropped off a journal in my ICU room when I was first admitted. And I think she probably meant for me to, make notes for my children at home, or lists or questions from the doctor. But what I started using it for was just being up in the middle of the night, and they were complaints to God. They were questions. They were, I don't get this. Where are you? How long is this going to go on? And those questions I found as I started really scouring the scripture, because I'm like, I've been a believer for as long as I can remember, and there's got to be some answers somewhere in there. So I started scouring the scriptures and realized that those are the same basic 3 questions that Jesus asked when he was detoured into the desert. And, we call those the 3 temptations, but anytime we have a temptation, it's an internal question that we're asking ourselves. And so the 3 questions I was asking were very similar to the 3 that Jesus was faced with in the desert. And the first one was a question of worry, when he was asked to turn the stones into bread. And the question becomes, is this life all there is? Do I need to focus on my immediate pain and concerns, or is there something bigger to look at? And the second question is a question of doubt. And that question is God always good? In the Bible account, the Satan asks Jesus to jump and see if the angels will catch him and keep him from getting hurt. And we feel that because we think that we're God's favorite. And if we're experiencing pain and we're experiencing heartache, where's God? Where is the protection? Where are his angels to save us from hitting our head on that stone? And so we struggle with that one, which is a question of doubt. And then the third one is the question of control. When Satan asked Jesus to look out at all the kingdoms, and if he would bow down to Satan, then all those kingdoms would be his. he was basically asking, I wonder if God's plan is going to be enough, because I don't really like where I am with God's plan. I know what's coming and it's not going to be pleasant. And maybe there's a better plan. So we ask that question of control in our own life. And that's the third question that I explore. And each one is asked in the form of 13 different essays in that section. So there's 3 sections. But when you're asking about the questions and why, what I meant by having permission to ask the questions, one of the things that I felt as when this all hit me was I felt a little bit embarrassed, honestly, to be at that point in my walk with God and to have to say, I don't get it. I'm not seeing where you are. I'm not hearing you. I'm not feeling you. I'm not seeing you. Where are you? And, thankfully, which is how God arranges things, there were people there that propped me up. There were prayer chains going on. And when I couldn't pray and when I couldn't find God, there were people who were helping me stay connected. But there were times where I felt like I was blocking their prayer, that my faith wasn't strong enough, and that maybe my questioning was making other people's prayers not effective for me. So I started really looking through and finding out that Scripture's full of questions. In Psalms, half of the Psalms are Psalms of lamentation, and Job is asking questions, and Ecclesiastes has got some pretty cynical things in it. So the questions weren't the problem. The problem was me ignoring God. And so by giving someone permission to ask the question, you are helping them stay connected to God and not put him on a shelf and ignore him until their life comes back together and then get back together with God. So my hope with the book is that it just keeps the conversation going, even during those times when you don't want it to keep going and it's hard and you're confused. It just keeps that conversation going.
Well, thank you for that. And that makes sense. And I love how you handled the sort of framing of the questions with Jesus. You wrote regarding the question of control. I just have your book open here, and it says, you summarize, the enemy whispered that lie to many of us. Your life plan is at least as good as God's, probably better. Besides, you don't have to be all in with God. You can still run part of the show. And that just really resonated with me. So, this idea that like our plans are, where it's at. So
Yeah.
thank you for that. And actually, I would like to ask you, in terms of sort of, we have on Writing for Life people who are really interested in writing. And so just if you could say a little bit more about your structure of the book. You've mentioned it, that it's essays. And so I was interested to see that like it wasn't a chronological account of the story, first this, then that, but rather 40 essays, as you mentioned. And so can you talk a little bit about that from a stylistic perspective? Why did you make that choice as a writer? And then did you like it? Like, do you feel that served the book well? What were the benefits or challenges of that structure?
Yes, there were a few decisions that I made about the book that were a little bit unconventional, I guess. Is one of the, like you just mentioned, it's not chronological. And at first I set out to make it chronological because I thought that's what people will expect. But then I realized that the story is so much more about someone else's journey through it than my own, that I wanted to allow them to have standalone pieces where they could read it in a short time span and, have that sense of completion. And they didn't feel, drawn into a long account that they couldn't finish. One of the things that I know, when I was in pain and grief and feeling all of those emotions, I found that I had a really short attention span for things. I was, a little bit irritable probably, and just didn't have a long attention span. And so having those 3 to 5 minute essays for people to just read one at a time and digest over ever how long they want to, that I found that helps process new discoveries better than having this long account. And they also lend themselves to being reread because it's, I think it's kind of like a children's book where, we know the ending, but we have comfort in rereading the story. We reread the essay, and we find ourselves putting us into the story when we do that. And so that was one of the reasons I chose the essay form and not chronological. One of the reasons that I focus so much on story, because there's stories from, my childhood and my raising kids, my marriage, whatever it is. And at first I thought, these are just my stories. These aren't anyone else's stories. But when I started to share some of that, I found people saying, no, that's so much what happened to me. That's what I felt. And so by sharing my stories rather than personalizing it to me, I think I made it to where people could relate and people sense that vulnerability. And they're like, I feel your empathy in that. And I can see myself in that because you were so honest about it. And then on top of that, that's how Jesus taught, was in stories. So I knew that had to be, I had to be onto something there. But as far as the 40 that you were talking about, there are 40 essays. And, we always talk about 40 being a number of trial or testing in scripture, which it certainly is. Moses fasted for 40 days and the Israelites wandered for 40 years. And, Noah survived 40 days in the ark. And so many 40-day stories, including the 40 days Jesus spent in the desert right before his public ministry. But what we sometimes miss is that in all of those stories, 40 is not only trial or testing, it's also God's environment for change. There was some big change coming on the heels of that 40. And so my hope is that the 40 days of my book would inspire a big change after someone, or even in the middle of someone's trial or testing. It opens up that environment for change in their life.
Great. And well, your book comes out, I just realized, the day before Lent begins. So it seems like this would be a good Lenten reader, and perhaps people can pre-order your book. And at the end, I'll ask you where we can find your book. But just maybe before we have that final word, you just said the word change, and you're sort of hoping to inspire change. So maybe can you just talk a little bit about how you changed from a faith perspective? You talked some about the ups and downs of your health journey. Like, where would you say, and obviously I know the story continues both for health and for faith, for all of us. How do you feel like writing the book, the experience you've gone through has changed you?
It, besides just the fact that we talked about earlier about feeling comfortable enough to ask those hard questions, because I just got a message yesterday from a reader that said, when you're asking those questions, it makes me feel more normal. So besides that, and just being honest about, I don't have it all figured out, and that's okay. One of the things I think that has changed in my faith is I have different expectations. One of the essays in the book is called Expecting Bad Days. And it talks about where my heart doctor, she was talking about heart failure, but she said, we were there for a checkup, and I was wanting her to tell me, this is all going to resolve. It's going to be fine. You're going to be back to normal. And she told me, you're going to be aware every day for the rest of your life that you have heart failure. You're going to have good days and you're going to have bad days. And I remember leaving that appointment and just kind of being not really happy about that. And I didn't know if I believed that. I thought, I think I'm going to overcome this. But what happened was, she was right. I have good days and bad days. And so what she said validated my experience. And so I trust her more now, because she was honest with me about what's going to happen. And when I look at scripture now, I look at it differently, because, for example, the book of Ecclesiastes, it's an honest book. It's a little bit cynical, but it's very honest. And there's a lot of other places, the Psalms that we talked about earlier, where we can find honest striving and honest questions. And it validates our experience. And so I'm not looking just at the high points anymore. I'm also looking at the questions through scripture. And I think that has helped validate my faith because it matches my experience. And so I'm looking at it a little bit differently than I had before.
Thank you. That makes a lot of sense. And I really appreciate that, you sharing that. So, I mean, just to wrap up, maybe can you tell us, any final words you have about the book, and then also where we can find you online and where we can order the book, and and hopefully pre-order it so that it's ready to hit our bookshelves or book nightstands for Lent
Yes, that would be
this year.
great. That I would love that. It is the name of the book is Divine Detour. The path you'd never choose can lead to the faith you've always wanted. And it is available on there's a book page on my website, which is loriannwood.com/books. And there's all different ways to pre-order and order on that page. It's available on Amazon and Barnes & Noble and my publisher's website, which is Cross River Media. And I would love to connect with anyone if they want to hop over to my website, which is just loriannwood.com. And I have a free gift that is born out of that striving period when I was questioning God. It's called 5 Prayers and Promises When You Can't Talk to God. And that's at loriannwood.com/hope. And so I would love that. I would love to hear what people think about the book and would love to connect.
Well, thank you so much, Lori Ann. And again, I just am so glad and grateful that you're with us and that you're sharing your story and your words with the world. And want to wish you every blessing on the book launch. And I know the Writing for Life community is going to be excited to hear this interview and connect with you. So thank you so much. And just keep us posted on how it goes.
Will do. Thanks very much.
Thanks again. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.